Please unmute.
You are very welcome, Ria.
Are you sitting in the ocean? You look like, you know, behind the screen, you know, you are just in the water.
I'm living at the bottom of a fish tank.
Looks like it.
Because my office is quite untidy, there's books and things like that everywhere. And so this is actually tidier than my real office.
But you know what, we love that because you are always writing new books. And there are several people who have already ordered through Amazon your new book about immune system. So maybe you can talk about it as well.
Yeah.
So Paul, yeah, go ahead and let's have an open discussion and let's see how we can implement the health protocol to our lives.
Okay, well, first, let me tell you that I am a man with very few friends. And that is because I'm very unhappy with the whole health space, and I'm very critical of the supplement industry in general, which is not taken very seriously by most of my scientific colleagues, because when we test the types of supplements that are sold, we find that they have no effect at all. So fish oil, for example, has been tested in a large number of prospective randomized clinical trials. That's the gold standard that we use to see if something works or not. And basically, fish oil doesn't work. The Cochrane collaboration, which is a meeting of the good and the great international, look at all the data, and they issue their verdicts. It's a bit like the scientific equivalent of the Supreme Court. And their latest consensus judgment is that fish oil has no effect at all, really no benefits. So this enormous multi-billion-dollar industry, people are selling and buying and consuming lots of fish oil, is basically a confidence trick. You could say that fish oil is really the snake oil of our day. And I've been in this industry and in the academic space for a long time, so I know many of the players, and I've spoken to the people who run the big fish oil companies, and we've had conversations which go a little bit like this. You know that my colleagues don't believe that your products have any effect. And they say, yes, well, we know that. Why do you go on selling them? It's a great business. And that's kind of how it works. And the vitamin supplement industry, the multivitamins and multi-mineral preparations, they've been looked at as well. They've been tested on numerous occasions in many different countries. And yes, we can tell that when people these supplements, the levels of vitamins and trace elements go up in their blood and in some other tissues. But you know what? We don't see any positive results, meaningful clinical out of that either. And that has really done a lot to damage the reputation of the supplement industry. And I don't like the supplement industry in its current form, because when you look at what is being sold in the stores and online, most of it's junk, and you can tell it's junk. You can tell it isn't going to have an effect, and it was clearly bought largely by people who were buying. And this is just a terrible business model. So I don't like the supplement industry. I don't like the pharmaceutical independent body, but isn't anymore. It's suffered what we call regulatory capture. It's basically paid for by the pharmaceutical industry. So do you really think it's going to be critical of them in any real sense? No, the answer is they're not. One reason why some of their most senior officers have been indicted on serious criminal charges, including racketeering. So I don't like the regulators. I don't very much like the medical industry, particularly in this country. It's the most common cause of bankruptcy. And many of my American friends are terrified of because they know that in the way the current system works, they will be bled dry and probably, unless they're very lucky, not come off particularly well as a result. In fact, death caused by medical intervention is now the third leading cause of death in this country. So who else is there that I don't like? Well, the food industry. Because the food industry has, using a technique called bliss point research, created a generation of what we call ultra-processed foods that are designed to make you want more. They're designed to be almost addictive. And in fact, there are numerous research projects which have looked at these and found that they are indeed behaviorally addictive. That's what they're designed to be. It's good business. But to do that, they're full of sugar, salt, fat, all kinds of things which aren't necessarily good for you. They're very depleted, they're full of calories, and they don't satiate, so you eat too many of them, and the more you eat, the more fatter you get. But even although you're expanding on the outside, because these foods have so little nutritional value, inside you're starving. So I have lots of enemies. They say you can judge a man by the quality of his enemies, and I have plenty to choose from. Who do I like? Not many people, to be honest. I think Rhea's okay. And perhaps some of you are as well. I haven't really got to know you yet. Maybe there'll be an opportunity to do that at some future date. But I and a handful of my colleagues, and this is a bit of an international network now, we're convinced that there is a space in here somewhere to help to improve people's health, because we know that the food industry produces foods which make people sicker than they have ever been before, and American public health is terrible. Life expectancy has been falling for 4 years, and it's falling in many other parts of the world as well. The pharmaceutical industry has come up with a range of very specific, expensive, and very toxic drugs that we use to treat the symptoms of the diseases, but don't cure them. And in the meantime, in the background, the numbers of people with these diseases continues to increase. So we do know that there is a connection between diet and health. And we've just been trying to find out, what is this connection and how can we put it right? How can we help to improve your health as an individual and help to improve public health, not just in North America, but everywhere else as well? It turns out that you can break this connection down into several quite well recognized categories. And I was responsible for defining some of these, but I'm not the only person. There's scientists in 20, 30 other countries who've contributed. But what we have finally realized is that the modern diet creates a series of problems. And those problems, in turn, it is those problems that actually create the epidemics of chronic degenerative disease that are now overwhelming our healthcare systems. So what is it that the modern diet does? Well, firstly, it tends to make you heavier than you should be, and that already is a problem. But at the same time, because it is so depleted in micronutrients, it creates a kind of dysnutrition or malnutrition, which we call type B malnutrition. Now, that's not like scurvy or beriberi or pellagra or kwashiorkor. Those are deficiency diseases that you find sometimes in the developing nations. What we see in North America, in other developed countries or OECD nations, what we find is something called type B malnutrition, where firstly, we are low in just about everything except calories. And we're low because we're not physically as active as our ancestors used to be. So we're not eating that many calories, to be honest. But those calories that you do eat, a lot of them are in the form of ultra-refined foods, ultra-processed foods. And in fact, in North America, the average consumer is eating a little bit more than 120 pounds of sugar a year. And if you do the math, the number of calories in 120 pounds of sugar is approximately a quarter of all the calories that you will eat in 1 year. In other words, for a quarter of the year, you're not eating any nutrients at all. And this is why when we study groups of consumers on this side of the Atlantic and on the other side, what we find is people are low in almost everything. They're low in many of the vitamins. They're low in trace elements. They're low in the essential fatty acids, in various very important types of dietary fiber. They're low in methyl group donors, cyanogens, conditionally essential amino sugars, conditionally essential amino acids. They're low in everything. The one thing people have enough of is calories. So malnutrition is now absolutely common. It's rife. The other thing that this modern diet causes is chronic inflammation. And we know that because of the ultra-processed foods, they've taken out some of the most important protective anti-inflammatory nutrients and replaced them with extremely pro-inflammatory and rather toxic compounds, including age compounds, ale compounds, LPS, and a bunch of other things which really you should not be eating very much of, but which are packed into the ultra-processed foods that now account for 60% of all the calories that are consumed in North America. And this is what is killing you, and us to a slightly less extent on the other side of the Atlantic. We know that each 10% of ultra-processed foods increase that you eat, you increase the risk of type 2 diabetes by between 12 and 14%, cancer by about the same amount, and early death, which means basically preventable death, by about the same amount. These foods are toxic. Not, a bar of chocolate or a bowl of breakfast cereal is not going to kill you. They're not toxic in the short term. But if you eat too many of these foods over the longer haul, they will make you sick and they will kill you. And that's really irrefutable. We have so much evidence to support that now. And it's gotten so bad that the big 9 multinational food companies are now causing more mayhem, more disease, and more death than the tobacco industry. I mean, the tobacco industry has been brought under, some control. You had 2 wonderful U.S. Surgeon Generals who, between them, wrote a series of reports on the dangers of tobacco and helped to bring in legislation sales of tobacco products, so you can't advertise them to children. The food industry hasn't been approached in that way. They haven't yet been brought to heel. And as a result, they're still very happy selling us these toxic foods that are causing enormous problems in the healthcare sector. And they don't care. They privatize the profits and they socialize the losses which land on our shoulders. So it's a big preamble. But that is why I'm saying we now do need supplements, because of this really unfortunate and toxic combination that today's lifestyle, that today's diet has created. So malnutrition, chronic inflammation, and a couple of other things. Because the ultra-processed food manufacturers have removed prebiotic fibers from the gut, almost everybody has dysbiosis. And the combination of all of these things ages and accelerates the decline of the immune system, increases the risk of septicemia. And because we're so physically inactive and because we're getting so heavy, there is far more of a risk of insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes. And these are the subroutines that drive the epidemics of coronary artery disease, of dementia, of cancer, and all the other illnesses that have now become so prevalent. If none of that was happening, we wouldn't need supplements. We didn't need supplements 100 years ago. We certainly didn't need supplements when we were evolving, if you believe in evolution. And animals don't need supplements either. And if you're living anything remotely like a normal lifestyle, and that is the lifestyle of a hunter-gatherer, because that's what we were designed to be, you would not need supplements. But we herd ourselves into the cities. We live confined in little concrete boxes. We're physically very inactive. We're eating these terrible junk foods, these toxic foods, and that creates a situation where supplements are now necessary. They are the antidote. Now, I've already said I don't like the supplement industry, and I really don't. A lot of it is so badly formulated, it can't possibly help. So we went back to basics and we said, well, if these are the real problems, if type B malnutrition, chronic inflammation, dysbiosis, if those are the main problems, that is something we can tackle. So we have a very small portfolio. We're not, like Herbalife with a telephone catalog of different products, none of which actually work, by the way. We simply look at what are the basic problems and how can we address them. And that's the simplest approach that really there could possibly be. The approach has been so wildly successful that we have expanded very rapidly, I think, to over 30 countries now. My books have been translated into over 30 languages. And in each one of these countries, we have doctors queuing up to come and work with us, which for me has been a huge pleasure, because even although I do want to work at the public health level, that's my main orientation, it's very important for me to maintain links with my medical colleagues basically on an international scale. I don't see them as the enemy. I see them as colleagues, and my intention has always been very clear. It is to work with them, to work alongside them, and to develop formulations which they can integrate into their practice. They will not replace pharmaceuticals. If you're a doctor, and I don't know how many of you are, when a patient comes to see us, they have symptoms, they have pain or disability, they need treatment, and we have a duty of care to them. And so we prescribe pharmaceuticals which will help to manage those symptoms. But if we're honest with ourselves, we know that's all that pharmaceuticals can do. The doctors that I work with, the international collaboration now still uses pharmaceuticals, but then at the same time, we will introduce one or more components of the health protocol, and that starts to rectify the underlying problems that are driving the illness in the first place. And then what we see in pragmatic terms is that as the patient's condition starts to improve, their requirement for pharmaceuticals tapers off. And many of them eventually become drug-free and really going back to leading a healthy and normal life. And once doctors have seen a couple of their patients moving in that direction, they get very excited. They remember why they went to medical school. They remember that they originally wanted to be in a business where they could help people to be healthy. And they will tell me, this has given me a new lease of life. I've now rediscovered why I wanted to be a doctor in the first place. So, yeah, you asked me a simple question, and I think I must have talked for a quarter of an hour. It is complicated, because even the simplest question, actually, it unpacks a whole host of other issues which all feed into this. I hope that wasn't too long and too complicated.
No, I think it's really eye-opening, and I know you for almost 3 years now, and I remember when I first heard your explanation about the food, that was really something that made me remember that when my grandmother used to live, and she was having her vegetables and fruits and cherry tree and all the rest, and the chickens in the garden, and all the taste and the smell just came back. And I was able to put together this picture that, yeah, this is the thing what Dr. Paul Clayton is talking about. And that's why we need supplements, because I got that question so many times from people, that how come your grandmother or your parents or great-grandparents didn't need the products. But that's the explanation, and I appreciate that you are so open. And I am sure you have lots of enemies, so no question about this, just listening to you. So we understand that, yes, there is a need, and I think we can all agree on that, whoever is on this Zoom call. But what is the solution, and why the health protocol what you put together is the perfect solution for most of us who are built up from body cells? Because again, I remember when you ever been in Budapest in my little team, like we had like 20, 30 people the most in 2017 October, and you introduced the products, and we were just so hungry. We wanted to learn everything, and we started to take the products, and we have lots of experience. So could you take us through on the main products, what we all need to have in order to compromise the modern diet and the need of our body?
I'm not saying that everybody needs everything, and I'm not saying that these are perfect products. They're not. They reflect current science, but the science is developing very rapidly. And as it continues to develop, our formulations will grow with it. So let's go back to the original problems. One of them is type B malnutrition, because people are low in just about everything. So what we've done is to put into one extremely complex formulation, which is Extend. That starts with a vitamin and mineral pill, but then on top of that, it adds a complete spectrum of tocopherols and tocotrienols, which is far more effective than commercial vitamin E, which is just one of them, D-alpha tocopherol. We add a full spectrum of carotenoids and xanthophylls, which are really interesting compounds that are very protective in a whole series of different tissues in the body. We then add an assortment of water-soluble and lipid-soluble polyphenols, and they are compounds with potent anti-inflammatory activity and a whole range of pharmacological actions. If you go on to PubMed, I can't talk about them because the FDA says it's illegal for me to do so, but they clearly have important roles to play in reducing the risk of major serious health conditions. You can imagine what they might be. I cannot possibly say. The law is such that I'm not allowed to speak to you openly and freely as I would in an academic meeting, because the FDA is basically owned by the pharmaceutical industry, and they don't want us to give you the kind of information that you could use to become substantially healthier. That's not good for business. But on top of that, as I was saying in this formulation, there's an interesting molecule called Wellmune, which is has about $3.5, maybe $400 million worth of research behind it, which is the most effective way of improving your innate system that has yet been discovered, and also tends to reduce the risk of allergy because it has an immunomodulatory effect. The next version of Extend, which I think will be version 3, also contains a very interesting extract from edible seaweed, and we finally got hold of this from a very interesting company in South Korea. And this is a compound which, when you eat it, it's derived from edible seaweed. It gets into the blood, then into the saliva. It bathes the roots of the teeth, and when it's there, it basically, any bacteria that would otherwise be clinging to the roots of your teeth simply fall off. This is the biological equivalent of Teflon. That means that if you have gingivitis or periodontal disease or bad breath, it goes away. That's important because periodontal disease is a really important source of chronic inflammation, which is very common in many, many people. And the risk of that increases as you get older. So Extend is a kind of a Swiss Army knife. It's doing a lot of different things, and it also contains some, as I said, some powerful antibiotics. Balance oil is designed to remedy chronic inflammatory stress in almost every part of the body. Chronic inflammatory stress, for whatever it's caused by, is channeled through a sequence of biochemical events, which include the metabolism of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids in your cell membranes. And then further downstream from that, there is a group of enzymes which are released called matrix metalloproteases, which create a slow destructive process of bone or joint or artery wall. And that's where inflammation starts to merge into chronic degenerative disease. We know that omega-3s, fish oil, doesn't work, and there was a huge intellectual problem associated with that. We knew that eating fish was very healthy, but fish oil wasn't, so something was clearly missing from commercial fish oil. And basically we identified what that is. I published a paper on this 5 years ago, which was so frequently cited that at a period I was in the top 5% most read scientists in the world, not just nutritionists, not just clinical scientists, but all scientists. So that was like my brief stint of a very selective kind of fame. It's over now, but it was nice while it lasted. And what basically we found was that the thing that had been left in the fish and hadn't been transferred into commercial fish oil was a compound called fluorotannin. Fluorotannin is a really important molecule. The fish don't make it. It's marine seaweeds, it's cold water seaweeds that make it, and those are the same plants that make the omega-3s. Nature has steered the seaweeds into making, as well as omega-3s, which they have to do because the waters are very cold. If they made saturated fatty acids, the plants would just freeze solid. Omega-3s have a lower freezing point, so that's why the plants make them. But the omega-3s are very fragile molecules, so the seaweeds also make fluorotannin, which is what protects the omega-3s. And when you think about it, the omega-3s in the seaweed, before they can get into the fish, they go through krill, small fish, large fish, marine mammals, and then the apex predator, which traditionally were the Inuit in Greenland. How do the omega-3s travel from the seaweed all the way to the apex predator over a period of time, which may be more than a year, and through all of these layers, trophic layers of the marine food chain? The answer is the fluorotannins. The fluorotannins are nature's chaperone for the omega-3s, and they travel with the omega-3s and protect them and are bound very closely to them as they're eaten by the krill. They pass through the system of the krill, then the krill is eaten by the small fish. The omega-3s and the fluorotannins pass through the gut of the small fish, they're digested into the flesh and then into the larger fish, and so on and so forth. And when we eat oily fish, we're not just eating omega-3s, we're eating fluorotannins. And if you look at the body fat of the Inuit in Greenland, who eat a lot of marine mammals, more than oily fish, it's a very strange color. It's brown. It's not like the fat of an average European or American, which is cream, maybe pale orange if you've been eating beta-carotene supplements. It's pale brown because the omega-3s that have moved into the body fat have been chaperoned by these fluorotannins all the way from the seaweed finally into the Inuit. So what we do is we put a very similar polyphenol back into the fish oil. Fluorotannins don't taste that great, so we use polyphenols from oil, but they're very similar to the fluorotannins. And when you eat that combination of the fish oil, omega-3s, and the olive oil, which contains this very high levels of these lipid-soluble polyphenols, the polyphenols do what nature designed them to do. They chaperone the omega-3s all the way through your stomach, small intestine, portal circulation, the liver, the systemic circulation, and deliver them all the way to the peripheral tissues where they're needed. And when they get there, the polyphenols then switch over and their other action becomes important, which is their anti-inflammatory action. So by using this combination, you get more omega-3s into the tissues and you get more of an anti-inflammatory effect. And that's why we see that people with inflammatory conditions, all different kinds of conditions involving chronic inflammation, go into remission very quickly with balance oil. And that is true even if they have been taking fish oil for years without any results. So this is not fish oil, it's more like fish in a liquid form. It's like the whole thing. Xenobiotic, this is the third element in the health protocol, is a very different kettle of fish. It's plant-derived, and it's a blend of different dietary fibers, but very special fibers. There's many different kinds of fibers. Some of them are inert, like cellulose, which we used, I don't know if any of you still remember what a newspaper looks like, but paper is made out of cellulose, which is a plant fiber. We don't use that. We use a different type of fiber, which is known as a prebiotic fiber. These are fibers which they're carbohydrate molecules, but we can't digest them. So when we eat them, they don't break down into blood sugar. So diabetics can eat them without a problem. Instead, they pass into the large bowel, and there they become fuel for the probiotic species that live there. Now, when the probiotics, lactobacilli, bifidobacteria, bacteria like that, when they see the prebiotic fibers, they say, thank you very much. They start eating them, and they break the fibers down into short-chain fatty acids, including butyric acid. And butyric acid is a very, very interesting molecule. It's a powerful anti-inflammatory, and it's also so that's a healthy microbiome, that's a healthy gut. The problem is that the standard American diet, or as we call it, the SAD, the SAD diet, has very little prebiotics in it anymore. The ultra-processed foods don't have any or very little. So in that kind of gut, the probiotic species, which are gram-positive, have all died off. There's a few left, but not many. They're replaced by gram-negative species. And the gram-negative species don't make butyrate. They're not making this really powerful anti-inflammatory agent. Instead, they make something called lipopolysaccharide, which is highly pro-inflammatory. And in a nutshell, this is the reason why there is such an epidemic of IBS, IBD, all kinds of gastrointestinal problems that are so very, very common today. All we do is to supply the microbiome with a very carefully time-release blend of different prebiotic fibers, which restores the dominant gram-positive microbiome throughout the large intestine. So now instead of filling the gut with LPS, which is pro-inflammatory, you're going back to the microbiome of 100 years ago, a microbiome which is largely gram-positive and anti-inflammatory. When you get all these things right, the balance oil, the xenobiotic, the extend, you're resolving almost all the problems that are caused by the modern diet and lifestyle. Each one of these products has an effect on its own, but they do work best when combined.
Yes, we from day one started to promote and use the products together, and we have excellent results and feedbacks from customers. And before we share some of this experience, let me ask you one of the products we are using as well, and we have talked about it, that basically almost everyone would need in the modern society the product which is called Viva. Can you share a few words about one of my favorite one?
Well, Viva is a way of improving mood. If you look at the clinical literature, you will see that saffron is, there's a lot of data showing that it is a powerful antidepressant, as powerful as an SSRI. We can't say that because we don't have a pharmaceutical license. All we can say is that it improves low mood states. So that's what I'm telling you it does. I don't know if everybody could use it. I mean, I admit we're living in confusing and depressing times. America seems to be going up in flames at the moment, but it's not the only country that's obviously going through a very complicated series of transitions right now as the global economy is imploding all around us. And these are difficult times. We don't really talk about depression in the same terms that we did even 10 years ago. A great deal of emphasis now focuses on something called resilience. Now, resilience, let me just explain what that is to you. It describes your ability to meet and overcome adversity. If you're not resilient, when you're presented with a challenge, It could be a social challenge. It could be a physical challenge, something that creates fear and despondency and alarm. If you don't have resilience, you will crumble. You will become depressed and anxious. That's the flight part of the fight-flight response. If you have a lot of resilience, it's going to be much easier, easier for you to face up to that challenge and deal with it. And that's really where a lot of the roots of depression are. Depression is rooted in feelings of powerlessness, of failure, of incompetence. What we do by targeting an area called the VTA, the ventral tegmental area, which is in the hypothalamus, which you can do with a handful of these natural compounds. People have more stamina, more strength. They aren't so damaged and disturbed by difficult circumstances, by adversity. They rise to the challenge, they deal with it, and in so doing, their depression, their low mood states, anxiety start to fade away. So this is not new. There was an Iranian physician called Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, who wrote about this 1,000 years ago. And he was a remarkable man, a polymath. Then about 10 years ago, a group of Iranian physicians looked at his books. They were looking at the Iranian ethnobotany, and in Iran is where Persia used to be. And then they said, well, is there something here? And they did a whole series of studies, a lot of clinical trials, which other people then copied, and they said, wow, saffron really is a powerful antidepressant and anxiolytic, but it's better than the pharmaceutical products because they're not addictive. They don't create withdrawal problems. And instead of waiting for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to take effect, they're effective within an hour or so of taking them. So this is something that beats the pharmaceutical approach hands down in every sector, which is why the pharmaceutical industry now is starting to hate us with a vengeance.
Yes, I fully agree. I have so many friends who love Viva as well. So I have my personal experience. And especially in the States, it's a great opportunity that now we have a package which is called the Health Protocol, which includes the 2-week stand, 1 balanced oil, 1 xenobiotic, and whoever signs up for these products, subscribe and save, they will get the 5th product, which is the Viva, for free for basically $126 per month. Oh. So I think it's like amazing. It's unheard. So for that kind of price, to get 5 products and the quality and all these issues what we have just covered, and the solutions what people can get, this is really, like a latte a day basically. For 126 products, you can give all these supplements to your body. This is really unheard. So I think it's a great opportunity in the United States. I am sure you agree.
If you talk to the people who are running the company, Doug and Orion and myself, I mean, yeah, people want to make money. I mean, of course, you have to do that. You have to make a living. But what we really want to do is to help to make the world a little bit of a better place. And if we can improve people's health and leave people feeling stronger, more independent, more enabled, and perhaps with an opportunity to make a living for themselves out of doing that, at that point, I really believe that we're starting to give something back. And that was what we always wanted to do.
Yes, I can relate to that, because in 2.5 years, we have in the European market, in neighborhood countries like Hungary, I have over 70,000 products shipped all over these countries, and I read so many positive feedbacks, product experiences, that this is really like heartwarming every time I talk to someone and they share their feelings. So maybe we can ask a couple of people who are already using the product to share some of their experience, and then there are some questions. Actually, Csaba is really active, who is asking questions, so we are going to give him the opportunity to ask questions. And also Francois has questions so far, as I'm reading in the chat. So why don't we ask Urata first? What kind of experience do you have, Urata? Because you are on the products for a couple of months by now, right?
Hi. I used products for a couple of months, for 3 more months, but I have testimonial from my brother who used the products in Europe for much longer. And his issue was lactose intolerance. He had problems with his stomach, and to the point where he could not go to the restaurant and eat without asking, do you have something in it? And it's much better that he doesn't have to worry about that. And noticed myself and my son, my teenage son, the same thing, that they were like, after eating, it would be bloating in the stomach or discomfort in the stomach for myself and my son. And we both feel the same, that it's much stronger. Our stomachs, our guts are much stronger just by taking balance oil. My brother
will have something to share about her personal experience. Are you here, Grisel?
Yes. Hi, Leah. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How about you?
Good. Yeah, sorry that I don't have a video. I'm on my computer and it doesn't have a video camera. But yes, I wanted to share my experience. I started using the products probably 3.5 months ago. And probably the first week, I can tell you immediately, and I'm talking about the balance oil, mainly, I started feeling, more brain clarity. My brain was more focused within the first week, about 2 to 3 weeks. I don't remember exactly when. I remember I went to a friend's house and we just sat by the pool, really close friends, the only ones that you visit during the pandemic. And we just sat by each on the side of the pool. And I remember when I got home, I realized that I had gotten up out of the pool with no knee pain, which I've been really suffering for, since I was 20 years old.
That is so common. That is so common. I hear that all the time.
So it's because I had gotten so used to it that, you don't even realize it. But then within 2 to 3 weeks, I realized, and I said, you know what, I got up and it was easy. I did not feel the pain in my knees. This is pretty amazing. And I have been to 3 different doctors, and they told me anything from, you have arthritis at 25, you're a woman and you have wide hips and it's only your mind, all kinds of things. And it just went away. And I haven't gotten any issues since. And then I also wanted to share the story of my sister-in-law, who started taking it at the same time as me. And she had been dealing with what she thought was carpal tunnel syndrome for the longest time. And she was pretty much sleeping, I don't know if every night, but at least every other night with, the braces that they use, because otherwise her hand would be too stiff and, too painful in the mornings. And she had pretty much left all the vegetables chopping or hard things chopping to my brother because she couldn't really handle it. Her hands would get really, inflamed. And after 2 or 3 weeks, she told me, hey, you know what? I realized I'm not really using my braces that much anymore. It's not hurting me. And when I go for long walks, she does, fast pace walks. She usually would get some numbing sensation and inflammation and pain in her foot. And she stopped, feeling that. So it's pretty amazing. And how I was most amazed how fast it worked, because I was expecting 4 months to see anything, but even within that short of a time, we really started feeling, some benefits. And this one is more of a question to Dr. Paul, because I know myself and a few other people that felt it. The most surprising thing for me is appetite suppression. I don't know where that came from. I actually lost quite a bit of weight.
Well, that's a kind of hidden surprise. We don't talk about it because I don't think it's been adequately researched. But what we do know is that the omega-3, EPA and DHA, when you break them down, they form compounds which have names like resolvins and protectins, and that'll give you a clue as to what some of their functions are. But some of the things they do include the reduction of appetite. Whereas some of the breakdown products from the omega-6s tend to increase appetite. The American diet is just chock full of omega-6s. And we see the results in the public statistics here and in public health statistics. The omega-3s are doing a lot of good things for you if you can get enough of them into the tissues. And that's the beef that I have with the fish oil industry. By formulating the commercial fish oils in the way that they do, we see that the omega-3s just don't get to where they're needed. Now, we have a library of, I think, over 500,000 samples now, which is the biggest in the world by far. And we are looking at red blood cell membrane profiles. And what we can see is that many people who've used fish oil for decades, and that's very common in Scandinavia, we look at their blood and they still have terrible 6:3 ratios because the commercial fish oils don't get the omega-3s to where they're needed. We do know from various published studies and from 100,000 other people that when you switch to the polyphenol omega-3 combination, at last the omegas get to where they're needed. So if you're starting with a European ratio, which could be about 15:1, it'll take a while for the improvements to show. If you're starting with a really high ratio, and the American average is about 25:1, but we see people with ratios sometimes up to 100:1, you're starting from such a bad place that even early on, within the first month, people start to notice changes. But what I say to them is, okay, that's great. I'm really happy that you're in less pain, that you're feeling generally better. Stick with it, and you're going to see further improvements as the ratio in your cell membranes declines to a point which is more like the historical norm, which is not pro-inflammatory but anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
So thank you for that story, and it's very much in line with many stories that I've heard before.
Thank you, Giselle. Actually, I have the same experience. I was taking traditional omega-3 for decades, and I have spent a fortune on all those products for myself and for my family, my children as well. And my original ratio was 25:1. And my son, Christopher, he was taking omega-3 since he was like a really young boy, and his ratio was 36:1. So, you know, it was nothing to do with the products what we were taking. It didn't really help. And then after 4 months, of course, he went back to 3.6:1, and I came back to 3:1 as well. So it's really a different feeling when we know what we are talking about, because we experience the same thing, and it's a lot more easier to share with other people. And that's why it's important that we share testimonial through this kind of conversation, and even on some of the Facebook groups what we are using. So let's open, if you have a few more minutes, Paul, we don't want to take up all your evening, but let's have a couple of questions. And let me ask Csaba, because you have put so many questions here. So let me give you the opportunity first, and then go to Francois as well. Csaba, are you here? Are you ready to ask the questions from Dr. Paul Clayton?
Well, I see a question from Csaba in the text box.
Yes, but he should be
here.
And
well, asking about the chronic degenerative disease, I can't actually talk about that. The law makes it illegal for me to tell you the truth. But if you go to my blog spot, and I will just type it up now. You're going to see a lot of articles there which talk about things like this. But if you also look at my book, which is Out of the Fire, you'll see all the references are in there, and it tells you what this kind of approach can achieve. And for the rest, if you want to know more, go to some of the online science databases, such as Google Scholar or PubMed, put in the search terms and see for yourself what this kind of approach can achieve.
Good. I think, Csaba, now you can talk. You have...
Oh, yes, now you enabled me. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. My other question was related, so with respect to Zinzino products, are you aware of any Down syndrome, so trisomy 21 related benefits or concerns due to the slightly different biochemistry or metabolism of those people?
Okay, well, none of our products are designed to treat any genetic disorders. That's not what our target is. Having said that, and I didn't expect them to, but I now have had feedback from a number of parents who have trisomy 21 children. And much to my surprise, I'm consistently hearing that they do see improvements. As I said, I had not predicted this. I have some ideas as to what might be happening, but I can't share them with you in an open venue.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let's move on to Francois.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Clayton. Nice to meet you, and thank you for sharing your vast knowledge. I'm here to give a little experience with the products, which I've been using for only 2 weeks now. Day 5, I remember going to bed and taking a breath and noticing how easy the airflow was through my nostrils. So being an osteopath and ethiopath from Canada and knowing some of the physiology.
Je croyais que vous étiez français, hein?
Canadien, oui.
Ah, canadien, ça c'est pas la même chose. C'est tout à fait différent, mais allez-y.
Donc, that's it. After taking a deep breath, I realized that, my goodness, the sinuses, my membranes were inflamed.
Yep.
And was helping to lower that inflammation and make me breathe better. Also, that was the first thing I noticed. And after that, my vision, I was like, oh, the street names were a little clearer. And of course, in the morning, waking up and just feeling limber, going to turn 50 this year. And not that I'm in bad shape, but springing out of bed is something that's just amazing. And
yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it?
All my patients deserve to feel that, no matter what age they are.
A lot of people have said to me, look, we have a problem with this because my prescription glasses don't work anymore. And so then I say to them, okay, go back to your ophthalmologist and get your eyes checked and see what's happening. They say to me, I can't read, or I'm having problems driving. What the heck's going on? And then they get their eyes tested, and what turns out to have happened is that their vision is actually improved, particularly if they have presbyopia. Their vision will improve by sometimes up to 1.5 diopters. So that does need a new prescription, but it's an entirely positive side effect.
Great.
Interesting. All right. Is there anyone who has questions for tonight, or we can go? And we thank you very much, Paul, your time and passion and your education. I always enjoy listening to you, and how passionate about I'm passionate about you and your knowledge, and I invite you all the time, so you cannot get rid of me, I can promise you. And I believe that together we can reach out so many people, and we can share the products with so many North American people as well, because we have a lot of job to do and lots of people to educate about the reality, and we have a tool in our hands how they can improve their health as well.
Well, that's up to you, Ria. I'm really more of an ivory tower kind of guy. I'm looking at the biochemistry, the metabolomics, all of that stuff. It fascinates me, and that's what I study, and that's what I try to work with. But I have no idea, really, how to take these ideas into the wider world. And I'm just very grateful that Zinzino has given me the opportunity to work with an army of well-intentioned and positively motivated people who can take these ideas out and change public health. I mean, I think it's great.
Yes, I agree. And especially somebody's asking about the blood test. And as we say, we are a test-based company and not a guess-based. Like, we never say people like, well, I guess it's going to work for you. But we say, it's a test-based. So please test yourself. Blood test, we ship it to Oslo, to Norway, to a laboratory called Vitas. And then after taking the products for 120 days, we will do a second test. So you will see with your own eyes the results of your omega-6, omega-3 ratio. And in the meantime, as you heard it from some other people, you will experience in your own body. So it will go hand in hand. And I think it's very important that people really can see and test themselves and figure out the solution and the results as well. So thank you very much again for all of you guys who took the time and came on board. And I can see some more questions coming on. So why don't you collect your questions, and we will find a time to talk about in the next time, and we can cover some of the questions that we are still getting. All right. Thank you again. Have a wonderful evening for all of you, and thank you, Paul, for your time.
You're very, very welcome. And Ebolia, you want to speak about children? Maybe we can do that at the next meeting.
Yes, because we have very good experience with that topic, actually, even in the Hungarian team. Thank you again.
You're
welcome.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.